Welcome to StreetGangs.com. You're watching part 2 of the oldest Crip gangs in Los Angeles. So I'm standing on 87th and McKinley Place, which is adjacent to the Avalon Gardens housing project. And this is the neighborhood of 88 Avalon Gardens Crips. And they're one of the first Crip gangs to splinter off of the original East Side Crips back around, let's say, 1971 or 1972. In fact, the gang was actually started by Jamel Barnes, who used to roll with Raymond Washington and the East Side Crips. But around that time, he decided to start his own gang right here in Avalon Gardens Projects, which is behind me. Jamel Barnes did not start the Crips, he did not start the Bloods, but he does get credit for starting the Avalon Gardens Crips. I'm in the Avalon Gardens housing project right off of 88th and Avalon. Back in 1938, the federal government gave Los Angeles $15 million to build about a dozen projects, and for the cost of $638,000, they built the Avalon Gardens Project, which at the time was designed to accommodate 165 families. There's like a gang every 3 or 4 blocks. Kitchen Crip is to our east, and then adjacent to the project are the Family Swan Bloods, and then you got the East Coast. This is graffiti of the Avalon Gardens Crips and the Family Swan Bloods, 2 rival gangs. The Swan Bloods are just located a couple blocks east of where we're standing. And somebody named Lil Raybone from Avalon Gardens hit up the wall. 88 Avalon Gardens Crip, AGC. But the Avalon Gardens Crips have been here now for over 40 years, and it's one of the oldest Crip gangs in LA. We're on Central Avenue on Los Angeles East Side, and I'm standing in 4 Trey Gangsta Crip neighborhood. This is one of the first Crip gangs that broke away from Los Angeles's East Side Crips, probably around 1971. But also, this is one of the most historically rich black neighborhoods, being that it was the mecca of the West Coast jazz movement. That included people like Duke Ellington, Lena Horne, Count Basie, and many other jazz greats. I'm standing in front of the Dunbar Hotel right here on 42nd and Central, and this was originally known as the Somerville Hotel. A guy named Somerville, a black immigrant from Jamaica, built this hotel around the 1920s when he found out that there were no places that a black man can go and get lodging. And this hotel became the center of the jazz community for people that came from out of town. It's now a protected national landmark. Now, what's interesting about this graffiti here is that it's written in Roman numerals. And what you got here is XL, which is 40. And then there's actually 2 gangs over here, the 4 Deuce Gangsta Crips and the 4 Trey Gangsta Crips. So that's 4 Trey Gangsta Crips. During the 70s and 80s, the 4 Trey Gangsta Crips were probably one of the strongest, largest, dominant gangs in this part of LA. But because of demographic change, in-migration of Hispanics, Mexicans, Central Americans, the gang is starting to fade from the scene, and it doesn't have that strong presence. And you got gangs like 38th Street that are pretty much the dominant gang in this area. But 4 Trey Gangsta Crips, they're still around, but I would say barely. I'm standing in front of 4125 South Central Avenue. This was once the headquarters of the Southern California Black Panther Party. And what happened here in 1969 was probably the largest shootout that the LAPD had ever had up to that point, where Black Panther members, armed inside their headquarters, took fire by the LAPD, and then they returned. And there was a 4-hour shootout right here on Central Avenue. And for those of you that want to get a good history of what happened here back in 1969, I would recommend Gregory G-Bone Everett's documentary, 41st and Central, where he actually interviews guys that were in that shootout. It's an amazing documentary. on 92nd and Hoover, right in front of Bret Hart Elementary. And this was a school where all the early Crips of the 1970s attended. But at that time, there was a gang here, a black gang called the Hoover Groovers. In fact, the Hoover Groovers predate the Crips. But at some point down the line, when the Crips became more established, they decided to join with the Crips. So maybe around 72, 73 is when the Hoover Groovers became the Crips. But they were probably out around 1970. So that makes them one of the first, or one of the oldest black gangs that became a Crip gang. So we're right at 88th and Hoover, which is really the birthplace of the Hoover Groovers. And I noticed this graffiti here, 74th and 83rd. And these are the two biggest Hoover sets today. And there is a little debate on which is the first Hoover set that started. A lot of people say 92nd Street Hoover, which is just to the south of me, and others say it was either the A-Trays or the 7-4 Hoovers, which are just to the north of me. But this was the center of Hoover grooving back in 1971. I'm standing on 104th and Vermont Avenue in South Los Angeles in front of the old Brookhaven Motel. Now this was a motel right behind me that a lot of West Side Crips used to frequent, including the Hoover Groovers. In fact, this is still Hoover neighborhood. And in 1979, Stanley Tookie Williams was accused of killing the Yang family that ran this motel. And eventually he was convicted, sentenced to death, and executed in 2005 for the crimes that they claimed he committed at this Brookhaven motel right behind me. This is the hand sign for the Hoovers. They do an H, and it's like this. Index finger, middle finger with the thumb in the middle. And they actually engraved the Hoover hand sign into the concrete. I am standing on 6th Ave in Jefferson, in the Jefferson Park area of South Los Angeles. And this area is considered the Avenues section for the Harlem 30s Crips. But there is also a small Hispanic gang in this area. There's an 18th Street faction that's also in Jefferson Park. This neighborhood is a perfect example of 18th Street and an African-American gang, the Harlem 30s Crips, that have no animosity towards each other. And there are multiple examples of this throughout the city. So right behind me are the exposition tracks, which the metro train goes east and west on. But for many years, these tracks were not even active, and it served sort of as a little physical boundary between the north side of the Harlem 30s and the south side of the Harlem 30s. The 30s go about all the way to 39th Street, which is on the other side of the tracks. And then going north, they go to about Jefferson 30th Street, which is on the north side of the tracks. So now that the tracks are active, the new metro train actually goes kind of like right through their neighborhood. The Harlem 30s Crips are the closest Crip gang to the University of Southern California. They actually predate Crippin'. They started probably around 1969, 1970, just as the Harlems. And then as Crippin' became popular, some of the West Side Crips came over here to this side of town where Big James Miller was one of the leaders and decided to consolidate them into the Crips. There is a short time where they were also known as the Godfathers, but that was a very brief period. And around 1972, 1973, they merged those two identities and then it became the Harlem Crips. And then several years later, they added the Rollin' 30s. And Dinker Park over here has always kind of been central headquarters for this neighborhood. In fact, it's one of the cliques, one of the many cliques of the Harlem 30s. One of them are the Dinker Park Boys. So a lot of people wonder, how does a gang in Los Angeles have a name Harlem? You know, what does Harlem have to do with this neighborhood? And the answer is there's nothing. There's nothing about this neighborhood, nothing about the geography, the streets, the parks, the names that have Harlem in it. What it was is one of the founders, Big James Miller, was originally from Harlem, New York. So when he moved here in the late 1960s, he decided to call his first gang Harlem.
When you see them goons coming, get back. If you see my palms rubbing, get strapped. niggas don't want nothing with that. You know that heat coming.
I'm on 154th Street, standing on the Department of Water and Power property, and I'm looking at a wall here that has a lot of original Swamp Crip graffiti. Now, sometimes when you see this gang write their graffiti, they'll claim Compton. Sometimes you'll see OSCC. On this particular one, it's just OSC, Original Swamp Crip. But every once in a while, they claim Compton, Original Swamp Compton Crip. But we're actually not in the city boundaries of Compton. We're in West Rancho Dominguez, which is unincorporated LA County, adjacent to Compton. I don't know if you can see this one, but it says WSOSCC. So this one is actually claiming Compton with the double C, Original Swamp Compton Crip. And the reason why they're claiming original is because Original Swamp Compton Crip is actually our oldest currently active Crip gang in Los Angeles, going back to probably the 1960s, before the Crip identity even became important. There was a gang here long before Crips and Bloods even formed called the Swamp Boys. This is where Original Swamp Crip gets its name, because areas south of Alondra and north of Alondra was known as the Swamp, but the Swamp was really a landfill. 2902 West Alondra Boulevard was where the city had a trash landfill site, and now it is a community of houses on the Carson side. All of the landfill that was once here is occupied by strip malls, houses, businesses, and they're even proposing to build a stadium for the NFL in another part of Carson, which was once a landfill. But if you look across the street of Alondra, on the city of Compton side, or actually the unincorporated part of West Compton, West Rancho Dominguez, it's still a vacant lot, and that vacant lot has been there for decades. But this is where Original Swamp Crip gets its name. Oftentimes people come to Compton that aren't from Compton, and they look at the community and the way the houses are designed and the yards are structured, and they can't imagine that a place like Compton has street gangs and high crime rates. But sometimes looks can be deceiving. And similarly here in Swamp Crip neighborhood, you drive down the heart of their neighborhood and you see nice homes, nice 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses with brand new cars in the front yard and nice trimmed yards, and everything looks nice. But that's an illusion that Compton communities have, and it's not surprising to me, living around here and growing up around here for years. But it's not always about how a community looks on the outside. There's a lot of other things going on the inside of the community that causes the gangs, the crime, and the violence. So there you have it. Original Swamp Crip is the oldest Crip gang in Los Angeles. I want to thank you for watching, and stay tuned for another great video from StreetGangs.com. This was the site of the Rio Theater. And the Rio Theater is important historically because it's the place where original East Side Crips and West Side Crips came together and created the Crip consolidation in the very early 1970s. This is a gang that formed on the east side of the Los Angeles River. And this is the first gang that was predominantly Mexican during its early years.